Dune Awakening's first ever DLC, Lost Harvest, promises a new journey, fresh rewards and more, but did it actually live up to its aims? And more importantly, is it worth the asking price? Today we'll talk all about the Lost Harvest, what it does right, what it does wrong, and if it's worth your time and money. Also, this is a spoiler-free review, so no story spoilers here, you can watch in safety. The Lost Harvest DLC introduces a handful of fairly simple additions. It promises a new standalone storyline, a new vehicle, 3 expanded testing stations, 21 Duneman building pieces, decorations, armour, weapons and some emotes. Pretty standard fare for a DLC, no groundbreaking assurances, but it should be a tidy, well-made package. For fans of the PvE progression of the base game, this DLC should offer more of the fairly high bar of quality, but does it actually do that? Well, I think it's best we start off with the storyline itself, the flagship edition of the Lost Harvest DLC. Lost Harvest introduces the Mithra storyline, a quest chain that begins with a distress call from a downed spice harvester. With a new but not exactly unexpected event to kick things off, a simple rescue mission devolves into a journey through forgotten testing stations, probing the dark corners of long forgotten chambers to find the remnants of perhaps some of the greatest threats not only to Arrakis, but the Imperium at large. In totality, the quest chain has a good balance of combat, exploration, travel and lore. In fact, it's quite packed with the latter. There's a lot of story and different implications to chew on for the lore fans out there. I will say as well, the writing is pretty stellar. Funcom's writing I always think is generally quite good, and Lost Harvest is no exception. There's some great dialogue performed impressively well by the cast of voice actors, and as you delve deeper into the story too, you get away from the usual concerns of Spice and Solari, and the questline reveals some impressive emotional and stylistic depth. The 3 new expanded testing stations are also wrapped up into the main storyline, and honestly, they're all pretty great. Each takes a slightly different vibe and experience, and I had a ton of fun in each of them. They're all well designed, they have a pretty compelling narrative, and offer quite an interesting gameplay experience. Ultimately, yes, each of them does just boil down to shoot bad guys until you reach the loot chest, but I think these dungeons are actually really good. They all have a clear design and story, can be replayed after completion just like regular testing stations, and overall they're one of the highlights of the DLC at large. Where the Mithra storyline does fall a little short though is the execution of some of the steps. Much like the main story, it's a bit of a slow starter, and the early stages do suffer from that usual trope of go here, grab this, come back. The late, middle and end stages of the story are where it really kicks up and things get interesting, but it is a bit of a slow burn start. The conclusion of the story is also a bit weak in my opinion. Without spoiling anything, there's still a few questions left unanswered, and the DLC experience kinda just ends. It's logical when it does, seeing as the player is kind of a cog in the machine for this tale, but it can feel a little hollow. Speaking generally, the story does a lot of things well. Great performances, an interesting storyline, impressive settings, but it does get slightly hampered by a slow start and a bit of a weak finish. All in all, I think there's probably somewhere between 2 to 4 hours of gameplay to get through all this storyline depending on your pace. In totality, despite some delivery and pacing issues, I'm quite a fan of the Lost Harvest storyline. I think it's generally a really interesting experience for lore fans. Away from the storyline, there are of course some new goodies included in the DLC too. The Treadwheel is the second biggest attraction, Dune's first new post-launch vehicle, seemingly targeted as an alternative to the Sandbike. The Treadwheel is rewarded for completing the main storyline and does seem like a viable alternative to that Sandbike. The skill ceiling is certainly much higher with this vehicle. I feel like if you learned how to drive it well you'd be able to pull off some crazy manoeuvres, and the lower worm threat generation is a nice benefit. However, despite it being an interesting vehicle, I don't think it's good enough to warrant using it when you have an ornithopter. That's a problem with the Sandbike too. The Treadwheel is fun to drive, it's just not super useful at the moment. The Duneman building set is the third big selling point of this DLC, a 21-piece build set at tier 2 health, built with granite stone and targeting a slightly more industrial and militaristic vibe. I've done a full video about this already, so I won't trope over the same points. I'll link the video in the card in the top right, but the Duneman set is fairly good. It's not outstanding, I don't think it quite does enough to tempt people away from Atreides or Harkonnen, and it is missing some pieces that would be very nice to have. That being said, it fits into the world really well, it feels very natural, and aesthetically it's a good alternative to the already established styles, but it's not as expansive or useful as some of the other build sets. Generally though, I'd say it's good. After those key items, you've got a bunch of smaller things. The decorations are fine, it's not something that will make or break the DLC for most people, but they're okay. Nothing to write home about, but they do fit the Duneman style and the DLC themes at large. The weapon skins are generally quite good. I do have something of a visceral negative reaction about this dragon-headed flamethrower, but when you play the storyline, the presence of this seemingly really out-of-place design makes a lot more sense. On its own, I think I'm okay with it, so long as this sort of thing doesn't continue. One item is fine, but I really don't want to see more designs like this in the future. The armour skins are alright, they're not to my tastes, but they do fit with the DLC's design. I can see people using them, and they are well made for what they are. Lastly, the thumper emotes are mostly a role-playing thing. It likely won't sway anyone either way on their decision to purchase this DLC, but they're okay for what they are. So knowing all the fine details, what problems does the Lost Harvest DLC have? The storyline, the main selling point, does have some issues. Though I generally enjoyed the story of Lost Harvest, the quest design in some parts of it is kind of weak. The typical go there, collect thing, bring it back format is fairly heavy in parts, and though it is a tried and tested formula, it's also a tired one. It does get narratively lifted by the growing mysteries of the storyline, but I also think it's just something that leaves a bit of a negative taste on the storyline as a whole. It feels formulaic and dialed in, and though it does kind of suit what's happening, I think there are better ways to do that. This is premium content after all, but even if it was a free update, I think the devs can do better than fetch quests. The dungeon segments later on are the perfect contrast, they're pretty compelling stuff, but outside of that there is an overabundance of go there, do this thing, or go there, get this thing, bring it back. There's some great story beats and designs, but it is bogged down by some tired designs in other segments. Additionally, the weak ending does rob the DLC of a satisfying conclusion. The story may be continued in future DLCs, so I guess that would make sense, but if not, the ending is just kind of there. Imagine I ended the video right now. Yeah, it feels like that. While it does kind of make narrative sense, it's not a very satisfying ending for the player. Outside of the storyline, there are a few more issues in the DLC at large. The treadwheel, honestly, isn't that great. It's nice to have an alternative to the sandbike. I think Funcom tried something interesting, and it's certainly a more skill-driven vehicle with a much higher skill ceiling than the other ground vehicles, but it suffers, in my eyes, from three core issues. The first is that it doesn't really have enough advantages over the sandbike to entice getting over that skill curve. Lower worm threat is nice, but outside of the deep desert and a couple of areas of Haga Basin, worm threat can be mostly negated by careful travel, especially in the mid to late game where you'll spend less and less time around worm territory. It's nice, but to me, it's a recreational vehicle at best. The second issue, I think, is the actual handling and mechanics. Now I'll be honest, I'm not a great driver, but I do think the treadwheel is a bit too drifty. It's fun, but it does feel like handling is such a harsh departure from everything else that most people will just disregard it rather than try to learn how to use it, as the barrier to entry is, in my opinion, a little bit too high. The last problem is more of a Dune problem in total, and that's just, why would you use a ground vehicle that isn't the buggy when you have an ornithopter? The treadwheel could see some use in the deep desert when it finally gets no fly zones. It's a smaller target, it's more nimble, and it does generate less worm threat. But right now, I don't think it feels worth using. Same with the sandbike, to be fair. It's a cool concept and a nice recreational vehicle, but the treadwheel lacks practical applications. There are also some issues with the Duneman set. There was the initial controversy with this set only having 4 building pieces, but that has since been rectified. It's not pertinent to this review as of now, but I'd be remiss not to mention it for clarity's sake. However, even with the vastly improved set that's in the DLC right now, it does rank a bit below all the other sets in my mind. The base game build sets have pretty much all the parts you need, apart from a couple in Harkonnen, and obviously the Chome Observer Twitch drop set too. Despite the big improvements, Duneman is missing some of the pieces you'd want to have. Railings, 1x1 doorways, wedge roofs, half ramps and stairs and so on. That doesn't make the set unusable, far from it, but I think it is lacking compared to the base game options. Architecture enthusiasts will still likely have a good time with the Duneman set, but it must be said that it is weaker than the other options. Lastly, the decorations, armour skins, emotes and weapon skins are, for me, a bit of a non-factor. There's nothing super cool must-have in this department, but there's also nothing I dislike. This is more of a subjective point, but these items don't really sway me one way or another, which isn't bad, but it isn't good either. It's neutral, and to be frank, I want cool cosmetics. For me, that lore just isn't here with these items. Time for the final question: is the Lost Harvest DLC worth your money? In the context of the Season Pass, which is £21 or $25 for 5 DLCs, pretty good. It's the equivalent of like $7 per DLC. The Season Pass is just generally quite a good deal all around. However, we should also assess it as a standalone purchase. On its own, Lost Harvest costs £10.99 or $13, but is it worth that? I do have the Season Pass, but had I spent that amount on the DLC, would I have felt satisfied at the end of it? That assessment depends on what kind of player you are. For me, as a solo PvE player, someone who thoroughly enjoyed the main story and the PvE segments of the game, and also really enjoys building, I'd be pleased. It wouldn't have exceeded my expectations by any great degree, but I think I'd be pleased. Were I a PvP player, a deep desert spice farmer, or someone who wasn't really grabbed by the story or the building mechanics, I'm not sure I would feel so satisfied. The DLC feels targeted at a specific group of people: story enjoyers, PvE players, and builders, and that's who this DLC will appeal to. Firstly, in terms of a numerical rating, I would give Lost Harvest a 6.5 out of 10. My scale starts at 5, dead average, anything below is below par, and anything above exceeds it. Lost Harvest does some stuff quite well, and there are parts of the storyline and some of the other segments of the DLC items that are genuinely enjoyable. However, the issues with the DLC do hamper it from scoring any higher. In terms of it being worth your money, if you're an avid builder, someone who really enjoys PvE or someone who really enjoyed all the stories in the base game, this is probably going to be worth it for you. However, if you're a PvP player, someone who doesn't really care that much about the story, or someone who wasn't really that enraptured by the building system, it likely won't be worth the price. It's a lot more palatable in the Season Pass. It seems a lot of people got the Season Pass, but as a standalone purchase, I think it will really depend on what sort of player you are. All in all, Lost Harvest is a decent first DLC for Dune Awakening, but it's not perfect, and it doesn't excel all the time. There are a fair few things it could have done better, but the things that are done well in Lost Harvest are done very well. Hopefully in the future Funcom build on the good and cut the bad. There is a solid foundation for future DLCs here, but it does need refinement. Anyway, that will wrap us up for today with my review of the Lost Harvest DLC. If you're a builder, a story enjoyer, or a PvE player, it's probably worth it for you. If you're a PvP player, or you don't really care about the story, or you don't really care about building, it probably won't be worth it. Thank you for watching. Hopefully this helps to wrap up all the details you need to know in a nice digestible package, and hopefully helps some people to make a more informed purchase. As always, let me know your thoughts on the DLC in the comments below. If you enjoy my videos, do check out the Patreon page through the link in the description. There's early access to videos, wallpapers, video credits, build blueprints, and much more, and joining us helps out the channel massively. On that note, a massive thanks to our wonderful esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. Again, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.